There is a place where the sky stretches like the sole edge of Frostmoor, north of the Whale Roads and south of the Sleeping Mountains. Here, winter is no passing guest, but a king whose reign stains every memory with frost. Long ago, wind sang through the bones of forests and gods whose names scraped stone, but now, that song is brittle, scattered by sorrow and time. The tale begins with Eira, daughter of Ingvar the Weaver and Halldis of the Mosslands. Eira's hair is the color of dusk, eyes storm-shadowed blue. They say she was born beneath the sign of Fenrir's cradle, a night when wolves howled not for hunger, but for grief. From her first breath, Eira felt the world's sadness stitched into her ribs like hidden runes. What sets Eira apart is not her lineage, nor her courage, though both are fierce, but a loss unspoken. The disappearance of her elder brother, Corp, before the first thaws of her 9th winter. Some said he was taken by raiders, others that the spirits of the Barrow Wood called him home. Only Eira believed he'd left willingly, fleeing a sorrow he could not shape with words. Her journey starts on the eve of another endless winter. Eira kneels beside the grave mound of her brother, laying a carving of a wolf and a raven, the symbols of yearning and the unknown. She whispers, "Return, if you can. If not, let me find you in the stories I must live." It is not a prayer for miracles, but a pact with memory itself. She will hunt for answers and for the meaning of loss. As the village of Deepmere slumbers, Eira travels the wolf paths with only a lantern and the echo of her brother's song. Her footsteps pass the snow-thick pines, where shadows bend, watching. In the old legends, the woods are said to guard griefs too heavy for mortal hearts. And tonight, the trees seem hungrier than ever. At the Midnight River, where ice splits endless, she meets a stranger, Osken, a wanderer clothed in fox pelts, with a face marked by striking sadness. Osken claims to know of a place called Mourning Hollow, where sorrow and myth collide, where the departed whisper to those bold enough to listen. Eira, desperate for any sign of Corp, insists on joining him. Their journey together is fraught. Osken's grief mirrors her own, a vanished child, a collapsed home, and their conversations are tinged with the vulnerability of two souls who recognize suffering in the cadence of each other's breath. They speak rarely but deeply, sharing details of longing. Eira speaks of Corp's kindness and laughter. Osken confesses dreams of a sister lost in fog. Along the route, mythology threads through their days. By the fire, Osken tells of the goddess Njora, who is said to gather tears and weave them into rivers. Eira remembers old tales of stone giants who mourn endlessly, shaping valleys by the weight of their sorrow. Each tale feels real in this world, each myth a refuge for pain. One night, they are enveloped by a snow squall, a world erased. In that wideout, a spectral figure approaches, a woman with silver hair braided with feathers and moss, eyes like clear water. She introduces herself as Tamlina, guardian of Mourning Hollow, and says their journey is not mere happenstance. The land itself responded to their grief. Tamlina guides them with odd riddles. You do not hunt for the lost. You become what is missing. Eira bristles, but Osken urges patience. Loss never grants answers easily. In Mourning Hollow, the boundary between myth and memory crumbles. Eira leaves offerings at a pool rimmed with stones carved in ancient runes, hoping for Corp's voice in the wind, Osken for his sister's touch in the moonlit branches. Tamlina reveals a ritual. Each must speak aloud the deepest wound they carry and cast a token into the pool. Eira presents Corp's old wolf carving, confesses her fear that love always ends in loss. Osken hesitates, then offers a scrap of fox fur, whispering a promise to remember, not just mourn. The pool's surface trembles and images shimmer. Eira sees her brother as a boy, lost but peaceful. Osken glimpses his sister weaving reeds by a summer stream. The visions are both comfort and ache, certainty of absence, but proof that memory can bloom even from vanished roots. Tamlina says, "The world remembers those who are loved, even when the living forget themselves. What matters is not the finding, but the making. What new stories will you give your sorrow?" Walking from Mourning Hollow, Eira and Osken realize their paths are no longer solitary. In barrow and wood, by fire and frost, they learn that grief is the guide, not the enemy. Each loss carves space for empathy and new myth. Part 1 closes with Eira and Osken watching the northern lights blaze above the sleeping lands, the silent promise of all things lost eventually finding a place in the story that remains. Their journey, and those they meet, will continue to explore the full spectrum of mourning, hope, and becoming. In the pale gold of their second mourning, Eira and Osken rise from the edge of Mourning Hollow, the sorrow still rippling through the pool's memory, but replaced in their bodies by a new resolve. Tamlina, guardian of the hollow, disappears as suddenly as she arrived, leaving only 3 woven feathers tied to a branch, a silent blessing for travelers who search the past. The path ahead leads them north, toward the frost-bitten ridges of Karsund, a place rumored in old tales as a domain where the grieving spirits of warriors linger, unable to find the feasting halls of the gods. Around each bend, they find remnants of lives interrupted, a bone comb left half-buried, a cloak clasp carved with the emblem of the lost, fingerprints in once muddy ground, frozen now for eternity. Eira cannot shake her brother's image from the shimmering pool, his gaze calm, but still out of reach. Osken, too, feels the echo of his sister in every shifting shadow. Yet what began as a quest to recover the vanished slowly becomes a journey to understand the weight each loss presses into myth, land, and body. They are joined before noon by a third traveler, Grima, a huntress of Karsund whose past is stitched with both triumph and tragedy. Her hair is white as the new snow, her eyes quick as a hawk's, and her axe is notched with the names of those she's buried. Grima carries loss openly, refusing to disguise the scars that memory has carved across her cheek and jaw. At first, Grima is cautious. "I hunt what cannot return, and that is my penance," she tells Eira and Osken by the campfire. But Tamlina's blessing compels her. She senses in these two a kind of kinship deeper than family, rooted in what they refuse to forget. Together, they cross fields where the ground rings with ancient songs, and their stories become braided with those of the land. Eira teaches Osken and Grima the lullabies sung in Deepmere to ease nightmares. Grima tells of how Karsund's stones mark more than graves, but carry every wish spoken to the sky. One night, under a bruising aurora, the trio witnesses a procession of spirits, women and men in old war garb, faces blurred by time, walking from north to south in perfect silence except for the whisper of shields on the wind. Osken, awestruck, asks Grima what it means. "Every year, the fallen walk to where their loved ones grieve," she says. "If their names have not been spoken, their journey never ends." This is the root of the Karsund ritual. Each winter, the living gather and cry the names of all who were lost, so the spirits resting in old sorrow might be loosed. The next day, the trio reaches the village of Karsund, ancient and built around a circle of runestones etched with wolf shapes and raven wings. It is a place barely surviving. Children thin, elders hollow-eyed, each person clutching a small stone marked with a rune, a name, a loss, a promise. Eira, Osken, and Grima are ushered before the village's elder, Jorund, whose voice trembles with years of grief. Jorund believes that naming the dead each year may not be enough. Too many have been buried, too few remain to remember. He invites the travelers to the Great Feasting, a rare event marking the coldest night, where all are meant to give up a secret hope or sorrow in exchange for communal warmth. That night, around the fire, children sing of wolves and giants, of Fenrir's hunger and the goddess Njora's rivers. Each adult takes a turn, speaking of daughters drowned, brothers vanished, mothers turned to legend. Eira shares corpse wolf carving and her dread of love's impermanence. Osken offers the memory of his sister and the ache that shaped his voice. Grima tells of a hunt that went wrong, how she buried her own son beneath Karsund's tallest stone, swearing to carve a wolf there for every lost child she found. By morning, the villagers are changed. Elders wipe eyes and stand taller. The children chase the sun through the ruined meadows. Jorund bestows upon Eira a cloak clasp set with 3 tiny stones, one for each traveler, and one for every sorrow spoken that night. With gifts and new pain, Eira, Osken, and Grima continue onward. Their bond is sealed not by answers or recoveries, but by the sacred task of listening and speaking pain. As the north wind rises and the land grows harsher, hope kindles in each heart, slow, tentative, but stubborn. They head towards the ice-struck town of Var, where it's said the oldest myth walks the world itself, and where the trio will learn that sometimes the greatest rituals are forged from the meeting of grief, courage, and forgiveness. The Aurora returns one last time, and the Saga of Frostmoor forges ahead, propelled by mourning, myth, and the glimmering promise that to share sorrow is to shape the gods and the world anew. The snows deepened as Eira, Osken, and Grima pressed onward to Var, a place spoken of in both wonder and warning across the Northlands. The route led through groves of frost-stunted birch and across frozen rivers veiled in mist. The world was beautiful and bleak, a canvas painted in white and gray, broken only by runestones and the occasional flicker of animal tracks, a reminder that not all who wander are seeking, and not all who seek will find. Traveling together, their pain became almost a language. When Osken's eyes grew distant, Eira might hum the tune of her childhood, low and steady. When Grima's hand shook at the edge of sleep, Osken would offer her his fur hood for warmth. There was no need for hollow reassurances among them. All three understood that comfort, when it came, was not a word, but a presence. As they made camp beneath the broken arch of a toppled giant, one of the ancient stone colossi said to mark borders between the worlds, Eira finally allowed herself to ask Grima why she never wept. The huntress regarded her calmly. Because my tears are weapons here. Grief is the only thing the wind cannot freeze or take. I keep it sharp for what comes. That night, they heard the howling, not wolves, but something larger, slower, and filled with old hunger. The legends spoke of Hrondr, the mythic wolf who mourned the god's silence, doomed to circle the world's edge, gnawing sorrow into the earth. Some said seeing Hrondr meant death, but others believed it called those in deepest mourning to witness the power of the old ways. Just before dawn, Osken awoke to footprints the size of shields stamped deep into the new snow. Though frightened, the trio pressed forward, believing, hoping, that answers lay at the place where myth breathes. They arrived at Var as a storm gathered. Unlike other villages, Var seemed almost spectral, homes half-buried, windows shuttered, a silence as thick as the coming snow. Yet from the center square, the lanterns of a feast flickered, a beacon daring the world to believe in warmth. Inside, they were met by the town's seer, Gjara, a woman whose face was painted with blue woad and grief. She welcomed them, bowing low and murmuring, "All who carry loss are kin in my hall." Gjara explained Var's ancient practice. Every year, they invite strangers who name their wounds, and the oldest myth is told in their honor. Tonight, the myth is that of Hrondr, lover of Skadi, twice exiled, whose sorrow carved the rivers of the north. Gjara asks them, as outsiders, to carry the torch of memory by sharing loss before the whole town. Eira stands and speaks, voice cracking, of Corp and the years spent walking the edge of hope. Grima names her son and every failed hunt, refusing to let his memory vanish in the bitterness of the hunt or the hush of fear. Osken weaves his pain into story, a tapestry of a vanished sister and a home undone by time. The townsfolk respond, a chorus of shared confessions. Some sob, others lean into the shoulders of neighbors. Gjara leads them in raising burning branches to the sky, crying out thanks for sorrow, a gift that proves love, that connects, that warns the living to remember. Just as the last flame flickers, the howling outside crescendos. The townspeople draw close, and Gjara explains the tradition. When the mythic wolf howls, the village must answer by singing, not hiding. Only then will the grief pass through, not consume them. Following Gjara, Eira, Osken, and Grima join the village in a trembling chant. The sound rises, fearful, hopeful, defiant, until the howling fades and the weight in the air lifts. Children run out to see massive paw prints melting into the dawn. The town awards them each a rune stone. Eira receiving one etched for hope, Osken's marked for remembrance, Grima's for courage. Gjara blesses their journey, proclaiming, "You have given us not peace, but truth, and there is no greater gift." As the trio leaves Var, Eira looks back at where the snow drifts glow gold against the sunrise. She understands. Grief honored is not a chain, but a signal fire. Their road now bends east to Ridheim, where it is said the dead walk openly, demanding new stories in exchange for rest, and where the hardest truths about love, loss, and legacy await. With the myth of Hrondir echoing in their hearts, the trio walks onward, the landscape behind them forever changed by the shadows and songs they have woven together. By the time they reached the outskirts of Ridheim, the sun rode low and perpetual on the horizon. To the weary, Ridheim appeared as a city of ghosts. Every doorway marked with blackened branches, every window draped in white as if mourning the dawn itself. Eira, Osken, and Grima paused, wonder and trepidation shimmering between them. Upon entering, two figures in bone-white cloaks greeted them, not as strangers, but as expected guests. No one comes to Ridheim by mistake, intoned the shorter of the two, a woman named Brika. Her companion, Egil, tall and gaunt, bore a necklace of tiny stones, each inscribed with a different rune. The two explained Ridheim's fate. Here the veil between the living and the dead thins, and each year, only those brave enough to tell their story may remain. Silence is the greatest danger. Eira introduced her companions and listened closely. Brika led them through the winding streets to the great hall, Ridheim's heart. Walls here were covered in tapestries, no battle scenes or feasts, only faces, each gaze stitched with longing or loss. Osken's breath caught as he passed a likeness startlingly like his sister. "They're the dreams of those we mourn," Brika explained. "Until their story is told, they cannot rest, and neither can we." That night, the city gathered for the ritual of reckoning. A fire was lit in the square, and the townsfolk circled, pressing tokens, bones, beads, wool, sometimes a lock of hair, into the flames. Eira pressed forward, feeling corpse wolf carving in her hand, willing herself to speak. Grima's eyes burned with anticipation. This was a ritual of reckoning for her, too. For hours, the townsfolk spoke. Tales of drowned sailors, of lovers taken by fever, of hope lost beneath storms. The dead were named, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with sharp, shivering tears. For each story told, the tapestries shimmered, the faces softening, as if untethered from their pain. When Eira's turn came, her voice nearly failed. But with Osken and Grima beside her, she described her first memory of corpse laughter, their secret wolf's den in Deep Mere, and how his absence split her world in two. Osken spoke next, telling of the fox-pelted child lost in fog, and the longing that remained a wound unhealed. Grima, with a steadiness that surprised even her, described the birth of her son under frost stars, and the day she placed his name among the stones of Karsund. Firelight gilded their faces, villagers wept openly. Then Egil took up a drum and Brika sang, a song of the old gods, of Njora the river gatherer, and Skadi walking the dark with the restless. As the song reached its peak, a cold wind swept through, and in its wake, figures appeared at the edge of the light, not frightening, but luminous, eyes gentle, each carrying a token that matched those now burning in the fire. The dead had come to listen, and to let go. Eira saw Corp, smiling faintly beside a figure Eira guessed was Osken's sister. Grima gasped, for her son stood at her shoulder only long enough to whisper, "You did not fail me." Then the fire flared, the wind rose, and the apparitions faded, leaving the city lighter, the air nearly effortless to breathe. Brika explained, "Every year, the stories keep us tethered to the living and freed from the dead. Only those who refuse to speak lose everything." The next day, Ridheim was transformed. People laughed and embraced, the market bustled, and the city's colors, once ashen, grew vibrant. Brika and Egil gave each traveler a new rune stone. Eira's marked for truth, Osken's for courage, Grima's for forgiveness. The trio left Ridheim changed, not whole, but more lucid inside their pain, and carrying with them the certainty that sorrow unshared is a curse, but sorrow spoken is a bridge between worlds. Their road now trailed north again. Beyond the ridges loomed the mist-cloaked hold of Eldvarg, famed for a river said to answer questions, and a forest prowled by mythic beasts. Here, the saga would shape itself anew, with old wounds and fresh trials ahead. And in their hearts, a new conviction. Every step forward was both an act of mourning and a quiet promise to those left behind. The northern path was harsher now, the trees growing sparse, their trunks blackened by winds as cold as betrayal. But around Eira, Osken, and Grima, stories clung like warmth. Each runed stone, each memory shared guiding their feet onward. When silence gathered thick, one of the trio would begin a ritual song or recount the shimmering vision from Ridheim, and the world would feel a little lighter. Eira's mind burned with Corp's face in the fire, with words unspoken. What have you become? Where do the lost go when their memory has grown strong enough to walk beside the living? Osken grew steadier, his sister's apparition giving him a peace he'd never thought attainable. Grima, for the first time, found herself wanting to reach the end of a road, not to run from it. They crossed the ridges into the Eldvarg borderlands, rolling hills riven by streams with water clear as polished glass. Shepherds in animal hide capes greeted them with wary curiosity. Eldvarg, they said, guarded a river, Ilsa, whose waters reflected not merely faces, but all that was buried in the soul. The locals warned the trio, ask what you are not prepared to carry. Ilsa holds the world's grief, and in the forest, the wolves are always listening. It was near dusk when Eira, Osken, and Grima reached Ilsa's rushing banks. Mist curled from the river, painting strange forms in the air, wolves pacing the shore, human outlines flickering at the edge of vision. The trio, hearts hammering, agreed to undergo Ilsa's test. Each would cast a rune stone into the water and pose the question they feared most. Grima went first. She hurled her forgiveness stone into the icy current and cried, "Was my son's death my fault? Would he have lived had I not hunted that night?" The river stilled, the mist thickened, and then a vision took shape. Her son at a distant fireside, laughter bright, his voice mingling with others. Then Grima saw herself, placing her last hunt's bounty on his grave. The river whispered, "Your love marked his world more deeply than your absence. All journeys end in the same night, but how you walk them is what remains." Shaken but clearer, Grima watched Osken step forward. He tossed his stone for courage and said, "Will my sister ever forgive me for letting her go into the fog alone?" The river's surface flashed, and Osken glimpsed his sister reaching toward him across a gap of light. A hand offered, a gentle smile. The mist spelled out, "Forgiveness is the voice that speaks when all words are done. Let it be the start, not the end." Eira's turn felt like a thunderstorm in her bones. She clutched the truth stone from Ridheim, whispered, "Did my brother leave because I loved him wrongly? Did my love make his sorrow heavier?" The river responded by showing Corp as both child and stranger, always looking over his shoulder at a darkness growing larger behind him. Eira saw herself as companion, shield, burden, and anchor. Corp walking alone not because of her, but because no love could hold all he carried. Ilsa murmured, "You are not the reason for another's shadow, but you are the reason the dawn is remembered." They wept without shame. When the last question faded, a great howl echoed from the trees, and wolves emerged, real, silent, golden-eyed. Instead of fleeing, the wolves knelt before the trio, each one pressing its head to the earth before melting back into the dark. Osken recognized the lead wolf's eyes, the same as the fox-pelted child in his visions. Grima's hand shook, but stayed steady. Eira felt the world's wound pulse through her, and heal, just a little. The next morning, the trio followed the river through deep woods and found a clearing hosting a ragged village. Wood smoke spiraled, children played in packs, and everyone wore small tokens, teeth, stones, bits of colored cloth around their necks. The elder, Sita, welcomed them. "Eldvarg survives because we name what frightens us and do not turn it into curses." The trio participated in a circle where the villagers named their current dreads, from hunger to love lost to storms to the last sunset before spring. It was not only comfort that passed between them, it was the sturdy resilience of voices in chorus, a music that kept even the wildest wolves sated. By nightfall, Eira realized that she no longer felt her grief was an enemy. When she looked to Grima and Osken, she saw reflected not just sorrow, but possibility. The next phase of the journey, down the winding river, through the land of the silent crags, and toward the ancient burial isles of Skarn, where the old gods were said to accept the tears of mortals, was ahead. Their loss was still their compass, but hope had become the horizon. And above them, the wolves sang again, an aching, beautiful song for those who keep walking, and for those whose memories walk beside them. The river Ilsa carried them eastward on a raft built by Eldvarg's villagers, pine logs bound with sinew, blessed with chance to keep the water spirits peaceful. Eira sat at the bow, watching the landscape shift from forest to stone cliffs carved by wind and time. Osken guided their course with a paddle carved from birch, while Grima kept watch for the river beast said to rise when grief runs too deep. For 3 days, they drifted through a world growing stranger. The cliffs bore ancient markings, spirals and wolf tracks, runes in a script none could read. Birds with silver feathers called from heights no mortal could climb. At night, they moored beside stone cairns where travelers had left offerings, shells, copper rings, braided hair. Each pile whispered of journeys like theirs, souls seeking answers in the marriage of myth and mourning. On the 4th morning, the river widened into a gray expanse dotted with islands. Skarn lay ahead, the burial ground of heroes and gods, where it was said the dead held counsel with the living who dared approach. Mist cloaked the largest island, and even from a distance, the trio could see the standing stones arranged in perfect circles, each one taller than a longship's mast. As they navigated toward shore, a figure emerged from the mist, an old woman rowing a boat carved from a single massive bone. Her hair was white as foam, her skin weathered to the texture of driftwood. She introduced herself as Sigen, fairy woman of Skarn, and studied each traveler with eyes like deep water. "You come bearing questions," Sigen said, her voice carrying the sound of waves on shingle. "But Skarn demands more than curiosity. It asks for sacrifice, not blood, but truth. What will you give to hear what the buried have to say?" Eira touched the pouch where she kept her remaining tokens. "I will give my fear of forgetting. I've held it so long. I'm not sure who I am without it." Osken nodded slowly. "I offer my guilt, the weight that has shaped every step since my sister walked into the fog." Grima's voice was steady as stone. "My rage, the fury that has kept me hunting when I should have been grieving." Sigen smiled, her face crinkling like ancient leather. "Then we may proceed. But know this, on Skarn, you will meet not just the dead, but the parts of yourselves you've buried. Some reunions heal, others cut deeper than any blade." The boat ride to the island's heart was silent except for the rhythmic splash of Sigen's oars. As they approached the shore, the mist parted to reveal a beach of black sand strewn with offerings, weapons, jewelry, carved figurines, and bones polished smooth by countless tides. The standing stones rose like the ribs of some primordial beast, and between them, shadowy figures moved with purpose unknown. Sigen led them to the central stone circle, where a fire burned without wood or tending, blue flames that cast no smoke, only light that seemed to seep into their bones. Around the fire sat the council of the dead, kings and thralls, warriors and weavers, children who had died too young and elders who had lived too long. Their faces were translucent, shifting like water, but their eyes held the weight of all the world's accumulated sorrow. The leader of the council was a figure Eira recognized from her grandmother's stories. Helka, the truth speaker, who had died defending her village from raiders, but whose words still echoed in the songs of the living. Helka gestured for the trio to sit within the circle. "We know why you have come," Helka said, her voice like wind through winter trees. "Each of you carries a question that has carved itself into your soul. We will answer, but the truth we speak may transform you in ways you cannot imagine." She turned to Eira first. "You seek your brother, but more than that, you seek to understand why love becomes loss, why those we cherish walk into darkness. The answer lies not in his leaving, but in your staying." Corp walks the paths between worlds now, no longer bound by flesh or fear. His love for you remains, but it has become something larger than memory. It has become a song that teaches others how to endure. Eira felt tears freeze on her cheeks as an image formed in the flames. Corp standing at the edge of a vast forest, no longer the boy who had disappeared, but a guide for other lost souls. His face held peace she had never seen in life, and when he looked toward her, his smile carried all the warmth of their childhood summers. Helga turned to Osken. "Your sister chose the fog not to abandon you, but to spare you. She carried a sorrow that would have consumed you both, a knowledge of tragedy yet to come. In walking away, she took that burden as her own. Now she dwells in the Mistlands, helping others find their way through their own darkest hours. Your guilt has no foundation. Her love was her sacrifice." The flames showed Osken his sister among other figures in a perpetual twilight, her hands guiding confused spirits toward lights in the distance. She moved with purpose and grace, her face serene in a way it had never been in the world of the living. Finally, Helga addressed Grima. "You blame yourself for your son's death, but death chose him for reasons beyond your knowing. Your rage has kept you from seeing his gift, every hunt you undertook in his name, every creature you tracked, every village you aided. All of it was his hand guiding yours. He made you into a guardian of others' children. Your fury was his forge." In the fire, Grima saw her son not as the small boy who had died, but as a presence surrounding her during every hunt, every rescue, every moment when her skills had saved another's life. Her rage transformed before her eyes, not into peace, but into purpose. The council began to fade as dawn approached, but Helga spoke one final time. "You came seeking the dead, but you have found the deathless, the part of love that survives every ending. Carry this knowledge back to the living. Teach them that grief is not a wall, but a doorway." As the first rays of sunlight touched Skarn, the dead departed like mist before wind, but their words remained carved into the trio's hearts. Saijan ferried them back to the mainland in silence, understanding that some journeys change travelers so profoundly that speech becomes inadequate. Standing once more on solid ground, Eira, Osken, and Grima looked back toward Skarn. The island was barely visible now, perhaps just another trick of morning light on water. But each of them carried something new, not closure, but transformation. They had learned to see their losses not as endings, but as beginnings of stories too large for any single life to contain. Their journey would continue, but now they traveled not as seekers, but as teachers, ready to share the difficult wisdom that sorrow, fully embraced, becomes the seed of something beautiful and enduring. The trio's return from Skarn was marked by quiet, a silence heavy not with dread, but reverence for the truths laid bare on that mythical isle. Eira, Osken, and Grima found trails leading south through wide valleys dusted with early flowers, the world shifting from winter's grip into uncertain spring. Their steps now bore the weight not just of loss, but of purpose. Along the low hills of Svartfell was a settlement known for its festivals of renewal, but beneath its bright banners ran a vein of old sorrow. Each year, the villagers built effigies of straw and wildflowers, then burned them in hopes of sending grief to the gods. Yet, beneath the dancing and songs, many hearts remained closed. The travelers entered as newcomers, greeted by Sindre, a youth whose mask of laughter was too well practiced. His mother, Alfred, led the village but carried eyes hollowed by mourning her spouse's mysterious disappearance in a past season. Sindre explained that while the festivals offered distraction, what they needed was not forgetting, but the courage to name hurts. Too many in Svartfell feared to admit old wounds lest they return even stronger. Eira saw herself reflected in Sindra's hesitation. Osken, more open now, suggested a new rite, a gathering where instead of burning effigies, each person would offer a memory, painful, joyful, unresolved, into the care of the group. Grima prepared a circle of stones in the center of the village, recalling those on Skarn. Sindre and Alfred agreed, skeptical but moved by the traveler's conviction. At the circle, the villagers arrived carrying tokens, shards of pottery, faded ribbons, bits of painted bark. Eira spoke first, telling of Corp, her brother, and how searching for him had changed her understanding of family and longing. Grima offered her rage-forged skill as a huntress, now recognized as the legacy of her son's love. Osken described the fog that took his sister and how clarity, bestowed by the dead, had freed him from guilt. One by one, villagers stepped forward. Alfred finally spoke of her missing husband, not as a wound that defined her, but as a source of hope for the community's resilience. Sindre laid a carved fox at the circle's edge and confessed his fear that joy would make him betray memory. Others followed, a shepherd mourning lost flocks, a girl weeping for her childhood friend who vanished beyond the mountains. With every word offered, the circle grew stronger, its presence softening the edges of each heart. Eira saw the transformation, a shifting from private misery to communal strength. The winds brightened, birds circled the circle and sang. At twilight, the travelers led the ritually unburdened villagers in a night walk to the river. There, the tokens were gently floated downstream, not to banish pain, but to let it become part of the land's eternal song. The river glimmered with bits of color and memory, a tapestry destined to reach places the villagers would never see. The festival that followed was lighter. Laughter rang bold and true. Children played beneath banners woven with symbols from each story spoken. Alfred held Eira close and thanked her, saying, "We no longer fear the ache. Now it calls us forward." That night, as the trio prepared to leave, Sindre gifted Eira a necklace, woven from river reeds and painted with tiny mythic beasts. Osken exchanged stories with Alfred, promising to return with news of distant towns. Grima taught the hunting children of Svartfell to carve tokens for strength, not sorrow. Their path turned now toward the great fjords of Hrolag, where legends insisted that tears shed on the cliffs could summon visions of future joy. As the trio journeyed, they watched the night sky, stars burning with the memory of all those they had lost, and all those whose names would yet be spoken. Eira reflected in her journal, "We carry more than grief now. We bear the memory of healing. Every word spoken, every tear shed, returns to us as courage." And at their campfire, Osken sang a new song, a blend of Skarn's wisdom and Svartfell's joy, that seemed to ripple the boundaries between mortals and myth. Grima smiled in the dark, feeling her son's hand secure upon her shoulder. Loss would always linger, but now, it yielded hope, a hope forged in the sharing and retelling of each story. The journey pressed on, its promise as radiant as the spring aurora above. The winding path to Hrolag led the travelers through glacial valleys and whispering fjords, where the sea kissed jagged cliffs with icy hands and the wind sang ancient dirges. The scent of salt and pine filled the air, mingling with the quiet pulse of places where the line between the living and the forgotten grew thin. Here, legends murmured, the gods themselves listened to the tears cast from the highest precipices. Eira, Osken, and Grima crossed under sky, painted with the shimmering aurora, each step heavier with the knowledge that the next moment might bring visions or revelations unlike any before. Hrolag's villagers were known for their stony courage and stoic reverence, but also for the layered myths preserved in songs as old as the glaciers themselves. At the village edge, they met Hafron, an elderly seer whose eyes held the fading light of stars. She welcomed them not with words, but with a ceremony, a weaving of ribbons and feathers around their wrists, sealed tokens for protection, and blessings whispered in a tongue as ancient as the fjords. Halfron's frail hands trembled as she admitted, "Here the grieving come to cast their tears into the void, and watch what comes back. But beware, the gifts are not always what we desire." The greatest rite awaited them atop the cliffs, where the community gathered to cast their tears and memories into the wind. Each year, on the longest night, villagers climbed the stone steps carved into the very face of the cliff, carrying vessels filled with water drawn from sacred springs. As they released the water, their griefs made liquid, the sky above shimmered in response, answering with flickers of green and violet. Eira carried a small cup filled with the last snow of Mourning Hollow, remembering corpse wolf carving and the voices they had met there. Osken's vessel held spring water from Svartfell, the last gift of his sister's memory woven into its clarity. Grima, with eyes closed and breath steady, poured hers slowly, water from the river where she once held her son's tiny hand. As their tears mingled with the cold wind, visions emerged in the sky, a swirling dance of shapes and faces. Ghosts of the past and promises of the future twisted in the celestial flames. Eira saw Corp, no longer as the boy who left, but as a guardian weaving the new stories told in this journey. Osken glimpsed his sister smiling with radiant freedom, beckoning him toward release and renewal. Grima's son appeared beside her, arms outstretched, a symbol of love's enduring presence beyond death. For hours, the villagers sang an ancient chant, their voices rising as one, weaving the grief of many into a tapestry of healing. Hafrun watched quietly, tears tracing paths down her weathered face. The gods answer when sorrow is honest, but the cost is acceptance of pain, of love, and the unending cycles within us all. In the days that followed, the trio found themselves changed. Eira's heart beat with a new steadiness. Osken's smile held layers of both remembrance and release, and Grima's quiet laughter began to fill the evening air. The strength they found in Hrolag was not the absence of grief, but its transformation into something fierce and unbreakable. Before they departed, Hafrun gifted each traveler an amulet carved from driftwood and bone, a token to carry the lessons of the cliffs and to ground them in the storms ahead. "Remember," she said, "the gods move with those who remember well." Their journey now turned toward the frozen north, the realm of mist and glacier where the oldest tales slumbered, where they would meet their final challenge, the place where loss and legend would intertwine one last time, and where their stories would seek their true end. The northern lights danced across the horizon one final time as the trio prepared their spirits and shields, stepping forward into the unknown, bound forever by grief, myth, and the enduring flame of hope. Beyond Hrolag, the world grew colder and stranger. The trio journeyed into Norseger, the land of glacier mist, shadowed by perpetual dusk, where the oldest powers lay dormant and the boundary between myth and fate thinned to a breath. The wind here sang of endings and beginnings. Eira, Osken, and Grima pressed onward, amulets from Hafrun heavy against their chests, hearts anchored by all the grief they had spoken and received. As they continued north, landmarks faded into blank whiteness, and travel became a walk through memory as much as landscape. Eira recalled childhood laughter under Deepmere's whispering pines. Osken, the final glimpse of his sister's fox braid before the fog closed. Grima, the winters spent guarding children not her own, waiting for her son's presence on the wind. One evening by a frozen lake, they glimpsed distant figures moving, grand silhouettes crowned in antlers, eyes aglow, wrapped in wolf pelts. These were the Mist Keepers, elders of myth who watched over souls brave enough to seek the reckoning. The trio approached, and the spirits parted to reveal a passage guarded by two runestones scarred with cryptic warnings. The Mist Keepers beckoned to Eira first. "You have shed tears for others, but the deepest grief is yours to name." Eira closed her eyes and spoke aloud the loss that most haunted her, the fear that loving too fiercely had driven Corp away, that to remember too much was to blur the boundary between solace and torment. The spirits listened, then gestured for Osken. Osken's confession was quieter still, the shame of pushing his sister toward independence, only to mourn her absence bitterly, the doubt he had carried across every mile, afraid that hope itself was a betrayal of her memory. The Mist Keepers nodded and called for Grima. Grima stood tall, cradling her amulet. "I mourn not for my son's death alone, but for the rage that kept me from welcoming peace. I carried fury so long it became a shadow, shaping every kindness and every haunt." With confessions complete, the central Mist Keeper, old as fjords and crowned in silver moss, produced a vessel of pure ice. "Within lies the water of endings. You must drink and witness visions of loss, possibility, and all the futures you denied. Only then can your journeys truly close." One by one, the travelers drank. Their minds exploded in visions. Eira saw walking with Corp beside a river that never reached its end. Each time she tried to hold him, he vanished, only to reappear farther along the shore. Osken beheld his sister handing him a lantern in the fog, the light both invitation and warning. Grima walked into a forest where her son's laughter echoed, and each echo shaped the trail she walked for others. When the visions faded, each felt not absolution, but acceptance, grief as a companion, not a rival. The Mist Keepers blessed them, marking their foreheads with frost and whispering ancient words. "From loss is born the world. Hold it with courage, and let the next dawn find you changed." The trio rested beside the lake as the night stretched on. Aurora shimmered overhead, the sky alive with color and hope. They understood, at last, the bargain struck at the saga's beginning. That love and sorrow are intertwined, each making the other holy. That remembering is not holding on but becoming more. With the Mist Keeper's blessing and their stories woven more tightly than ever, Eira, Osken, and Grima prepared to descend from the icy north, returning at last to the world of villages, kin, and the living, ready to bring wisdom earned in pain and myth, bearing new rituals and songs for all who wait. Their journey neared its ending, but the grief they carried now sang like the northern lights, fierce, beautiful, and enduring. Southward the travelers came, through thawing valleys where the first threads of green stitched lace along the snow's retreat. Eira, Osken, and Grima felt the weight of their story with every step, not as a burden, but as song and memory etched deep into flesh and spirit. Skarn's truths lingered, Hrolag's visions flickered at the edges of sleep. The Mist Keeper's blessing tingled frozen at their brows. When at last they reached Deep Mere, Eira's childhood home, the village was transformed. Elders and children alike gathered beneath new banners, tokens from their journeys hanging alongside old wolf carvings. Osken smiled shyly at the girl who once snuck fish to him on festival days. Grima glanced at the hunting fields and saw not loss, but hope, blooming where she'd taught the children to track and carve. News of their return spread quickly. Villagers from Ridheim, Var, and Svartfell journeyed to Deep Mere for the great telling. In the central hall, fires crackled and voices mingled, stories of hardship and hope, of journeys endured and lessons won at steep cost. As the feast began, Eira stood and drew a wide circle on the earthen floor with a branch of birch. "We are all keepers of grief," she said, "and all witnesses to the way sorrow turns to kinship and courage. Let every voice join with mine. Let every memory, lost or carried, have a place in our story." The evening blossomed into ritual, children tying bright ribbons around everyone's wrists, Osken leading a chorus adapting Hrolag's chants into melodies for both laughter and tears. Grima presented a necklace for each household in Deep Mere, driftwood for endurance, riverstone for memory, and a wolf's tooth to remind all that even the fiercest pain can become a protector. At the midnight hour, Hafrun, the seer from Hrolag, and Brika from Ridheim stood to address the gathering. Halfrun's voice was strong. "You have woven sorrow into a new tapestry. None here will fear grief's name again." Brika nodded, adding, "What you have learned in the north belongs to every hearth, remembered, retold, and ritualized, so none will walk alone again." One final rite remained, the circle of memory. Each person placed a token in the center, an old toy, a broken ring, a sprig of pine, to honor those who shaped their lives and those who had waited quietly